digitalization and technology adoption is one of the major forces of transformation that is happening. So we'll see a little bit in depth. Climate change and the pressure that it's causing, and the transition to green economy. So there are opportunities being created, but also there are also challenges of compliance. Rules are coming up, and how do you tackle with those rules? But there's also consequences for businesses and people in terms of production, livelihoods are being impacted. There are policy and regulatory shifts happening as a result of these changes. So there's, I know in Kenya, for example, there's the technology or the digital economy policy and regulations coming up internationally. There are discussions for conventions and recommendations in the ILO to govern the platform economy. So there are shifts happening in terms of policy. There are also demographic changes. We heard it this morning again from the Honorable Vice President telling us that this demographic change and youth bulge creates opportunities, but also challenges. So what does this all mean for businesses? And then, of course, there's a global trade realignment happening right now. There's tariff pressures in certain contexts. So there's a global supply chain disruptions, or in some cases, supply chains are also being realigned. What does this all mean for Africa and for businesses? And what does this mean for EBMOs moving forward? So EBMOs, for those who are not aware of this abbreviation, we are very popular in the ILO for using too much abbreviations. It means employers organizations and business membership organizations. So it stands for both. So FKE, for example, the Federation of Kenyan Employers, is in the ILO terminology, or in our terminology, it is an EBMO. It's an employer organization and a member-driven or member-based organization representing business and business interests. So that's what we mean by EBMOs. So I have a problem moving this. If you could shift them maybe, the slide. So one of the mega forces of this transformation is technology. We all know this, we have heard it, and there are ample opportunities, but again, there are some challenges that needs to be overcome. So first to think is the size of the African internet economy or the digital economy. It's expanding, jumping in leaps, and so I'm using the word internet economy to say broadly, to refer to the extent of internet or digital penetration in Africa. It's massive, and there are ample opportunities being created there. It's adding 180 billion to Africa's GDP this year alone, and that's a massive size. That's about 6.4% of GDP. That's the potential this new economy, or the digital economy, is creating in Africa. And again, it's adding to the resilience in some cases, but robustness and dynamism of the African business landscape. In Accra, Addis Ababa, Lagos, Nairobi, Cape Town, Kigali, and so many major cities in Africa are becoming important innovation hubs as a result. So that's an ample opportunity. So this the digital penetration is big. The smartphone usage and young people in particular are using smartphones for various purposes, but including for advancing businesses. And it's also creating new market opportunity and new way of connecting with businesses and having new customer experiences for businesses. In Kenya, for example, the gig economy in 2019 was 109 million in terms of the annual turnover on that year, hiring about 36,000 people in 2019, just before the pandemics. And then after the pandemics, the figure jumped. That's 345 million by 2023, employing 1.2 million, or 4% of the workforce. And that's a great opportunity in some ways. But there are various forces at play here. It's not only the digital penetration, but also, of course, the lack of jobs sometimes make it impossible to get other jobs. So I think people are seizing this opportunity, the opportunity that the digital economy is providing. In particular, digital labor platforms are becoming important in many ways in providing new employment opportunities and income opportunities. So many people who work in the digital economy do not necessarily work full-time. There may be many who work full-time, but others work on the digital economy or in platform economy to supplement their income. most of them are youth and women who would have had difficulties accessing the traditional labor market. So in terms of easing up the pressure the Vice President was talking about earlier, joblessness is creating social tension and pressure. So I think to some extent by providing employment opportunity and income earning opportunity, platform is providing a breathing space for young people and helping to ease potential tension. But it could also, in terms of the media usage, for example, misinformation and all kinds of that, things associated with media or social media usage is another danger that the Vice President mentioned earlier this morning, reminding us to the opportunities, but again, the challenges that exist. There are also discussions about some concerns concerning distant work issues, but I think these issues are being addressed, and it's very important to think about these issues in terms of ethics, in terms of social cohesion and advancing social justice, as the regional director for ILO reminded us earlier, but also we were also reminded by Ms. Mugo earlier that distant work and social justice need not be at clash with business interest. And I think this need to come together, and I think the boundary between what is of business interest and what is of social interest is actually blurry, and in many ways they can reinforce each other and they don't have to be competitive, as we heard it earlier. In Nigeria, the digital economy was expected to create about 18%, was expected to account for 18% of GDP in 2023. So it's becoming an important force for diversification, economic diversification, and adding value addition to services, but also to the resilience of our economies in Africa. So there are ample opportunities, as we said, because of the digital technology transformations, efficiency, innovation, and this is driving up productivity. There's new market opportunities and customer experiences being created. Business continuity and resilience, and this is absolutely essential element, because again, in the pandemic, as we saw it during the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of businesses that have digital presence were able to continue operating because they have their labor forces. Of course, it's a lockdown era, but they have systems in place to coordinate their activities, but also to reach out to customers through online provisions of service, particularly advisory services, etc. But those that do not have digital presence really suffered. Therefore, sometimes the digital technologies are also providing this ability to stay in business. That's what business continuity is all about. It's also providing opportunities for formalization, because you can track payments that are happening through digital platforms, for example. So again, widening the tax base, and that's very, very important, particularly in the African context where the tax base is really narrow because the formal economy is very small. So, government tax policies are always targeting fewer enterprises, whereas you've got a huge chunk of the economy which is outside of the purview of tax authorities or the government simply. So by providing opportunity for tracking payments, this digital innovations such as the platform economy could actually create opportunities for formalization, which never existed before at that scale. So there are a number of opportunities that exist there, but there are also risks in terms of particularly the technological divide, both north-south divide, because Africa needs to be competitive and African businesses are not operating in an enclave or in an island. You're part of the global supply chains, you're part of the global economy. So again, it's very important that north-south divide be addressed, particularly the technological divide in terms of access to internet and internet infrastructures. So that's absolutely essential, and there's a great need to accelerate investment in those aspects. The urban-rural divide is also a critical one. And again, cities like Nairobi, for example, are well connected and have better digital infrastructures compared to rural areas, and that's sort of amplifying the rural-urban divide and actually adding more pressure for rural-urban migration, which is creating a number of problems as well. Lack of STEM skills, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematical skills is also an essential problem. So shortage of skills is curtailing businesses' ability to expand in many of the countries. And I think a number of companies in Africa, about 60% of surveyed companies in Africa, refer skills shortages as a severe limitation to their ability to expand, to be more productive and competitive in the global market. So again, that's a very, very serious issue. And cybersecurity, as you move more and more to a digital life and digital presence, that creates vulnerability in some ways from cyber attacks and different failures. So again, cybersecurity is a critical issue. Now we're saying digital technology could add resilience, but it could also make you vulnerable in the absence of a secure digital presence. So cybersecurity is a big concern that needs to be dealt with, but the lack of skills to provide cybersecurity is a serious, serious problem also to the ability of businesses to expand their digital presence safely. Now, I mentioned the skills mismatch and workforce preparedness is a serious issue. Just to give you some figures, in Kenya alone, 70% of graduates need additional training. Again, this is a result from surveys conducted by ILO previously. In Uganda, about 63% of graduates are not ready for jobs at the time of their graduation. So this shows the existence and severity of the skills mismatch that exists. What schools and universities produce and what the labor market demands aren't necessarily aligned. So there's a sort of a misalignment in that respect. So key skill gaps exist in digital literacy, problem solving, adaptability, and leadership, and the kind of skills that the digital economy requires or various of these transformations would require. Customer experiences would require this sort of preparedness and ability to work in team, problem solving, ability to work independently, but also various kinds of soft skills are critically needed. Now, there's also a governance challenge across Africa. Increasingly, there are improvements in many ways. There's a transition to democracy and quasi-democratic systems, but also there are also setbacks in many countries. So the twin forces of governance instability, one is the political instability. So we've seen, again, military takeovers in certain parts of Africa, increasing social instability and social tensions mounting in various parts. And this is creating serious problems in most of the African continent. But again, economic volatility, such as high debt, inflation, interest rates, currency instability, again, these are adding pressure. But this all feed each other in many ways. So the current trends and the emerging trends and the mega trends that we see, demographic shifts and so on, are related to some extent to the social and political instability that we see. The macroeconomic volatility, to some extent, is a result of external shock that is happening. You know, the war that are taking place, the global trade realignment that is taking place, you know, all this tariff pressures, for example. A number of African countries are losing the traditional markets they had. In terms of preferential trade schemes, for example, are being undermined in many parts. So there's a number of pressure that's happening. So some of these are really shocks that came from external forces, but some are internal in many ways. Some are in terms of how governments are running their policies. So I think there are really problems. There's a retreat from democratic principles. Civic spaces are also narrowing in some parts of the continent. But again, this is not exceptional to the African continent. We see this happening elsewhere as well in many parts of the world. Social dialogue and freedom of association are being undermined, and employers feel the pressure in many ways. So this is really undermining the business environment. And I think there's also lack of awareness that the business environment is like an egg. It's fragile. It needs to be handled with care. Because business confidence is at the core of everything we aspire to achieve. You cannot have social justice without creating jobs, as the ILO regional director earlier noted. It's an essential part. Employers create employment, and if you want to have social justice, And the only way to empower businesses to advance social justice is to give them a convenient business environment so businesses can do what they are meant to do. Businesses are in the business of running businesses. So the only way they can do that is if there is a the business environment is an enabling one, and that's at the core of everything else. But that's under pressure in many ways. So global shocks and external dependencies, as I said, like the Russia-Ukraine war added 30 billion in Africa's food and fuel import bills. This is just in 2022 alone. So cumulatively, this has really shaken Africa. It has diverted resources from development. The African trade balance is severely deteriorating, creating lots of pressure in terms of inflation, in terms of depreciating currency, instability in currency. Again, most of Africa's debts are foreign currency linked. A lot of these borrowings are in US dollars and so on. So as the African currency depreciates in local currency, the debts, the national debts are multiplying by several folds, creating a huge macroeconomic instability in the continent. And that has bearings to the business environment in many ways. The COVID-19 exposed just the reliance on imported raw materials for Africa. And I think it further amplified what we always knew, that Africa needs to diversify its economy and add industrial value more and more. But there are challenges to do that, as we'll see shortly. Shipping delays and rising logistics. So this is due to the supply chain disruptions. Again, Africa is not an exception. Many countries, and in many other continents, were also impacted. But the challenge is severe in Africa because of the lack of financial means to deal with this, and the institutional capacity have been limited in Africa. Therefore, Africa was more exposed to those external shocks. And there are differences on how businesses bear and weathered these shocks. Naturally, again, as expected, large firms has the means to deal with this challenge, and they did so very easily. But SMEs with limited capital and weak capacity to deal with all the regulatory requirements and so on were severely impacted. And the business environment tends to be more restrictive on SMEs, not because it singles out SMEs and put or impose more restrictions on them, but it simply is they've got less means and less ability to deal with that. So that's a serious problem. There are also sectoral differences in terms of impact. Certain sectors fared well than other sectors, but some sectors, such as agriculture, are exposed to most of these mega trends and the negative consequences, whereas for other sectors, such as ICT, there's also ample opportunity in this transformation that are happening. Now, when it comes to trade issues and the trade alignment, one thing that, because of the structure of Africa's trade, which heavily depends on agricultural commodities and raw materials and so on, particularly those countries that depend on agricultural commodities for exports, such as Kenya, for example, on tea and coffee and so on, those countries face severe restrictions in terms of tariff peaks and tariff escalations. So tariff escalations means you export at low tariff or even zero tariff if you are exporting, say, for example, raw coffee, but the moment you roast it and packed it and processed it, then you start facing higher and higher tariffs. So that has been discouraging industrial value addition in Africa. So I think what the African Continental Free Trade Agreement does is provide us a potential market for industrial value addition. And that's absolutely important development. So potentially intra-Africa trade growth is projected to be like 52% by 2035. So right now it's about 14%. So that's the 14% of Africa's trade is intra-Africa, or it's taking place among countries that are within the continent or the sister countries that are in the continent. But this could expand. But this is the potential. So potential doesn't necessarily mean that's what's gonna be the reality. Because there are implementation challenges. So for this 52% to be realized, these challenges need to be addressed. So the potential is there, but the limitations are also there. These limitations include transport costs, absence of well-functioning roads and shipping lines and so on. So there's a connection issue within the continent. In fact, many of you who flew to this conference as you found it, you had to go through different connection points to reach here. In certain cases, two neighboring countries in Africa, to reach out from one capital to another, you need to go through a third country, which is probably outside of the continent. That also happens. So I think, and in that context, it would be extremely difficult to promote intra-industry services and goods trade. So again, those limitations need to be resolved. There are, again, non-harmonized policies and rules of origin and different kinds of regulations, which makes it difficult to realize this, the potential that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement would provide. So there's a number of issues that needs to be overcome, but the opportunity is there, and the dynamism is there as well. So informality, we looked at this earlier, but again, informal employment in sub-Saharan Africa is 85.5%. So despite all these mega trends that are happening and shaping up the employment landscape, the labor landscape, and the policy landscape in Africa, it looks like informality is something that's not changing. It's there, it's lingering, and it's posing a severe challenge for what Africa aspires to achieve. As a result, again, it has huge bearings on productivity because it may act as competition. So in some ways, employers mostly or businesses would refer it as unfair competition. Lots of people who are in the informal sector are not there because of entrepreneurial spirit, but these are necessity entrepreneurs or necessity operators. They're just there to survive because of the absence of any opportunity, and they have no access to finance, they have no access to market and so on. So that creates a severe challenge. It continues to be creating a severe challenge. In Benin, for example, the private sector accounts for only about 15,000 jobs. That's absolutely small. So the informality seems to be the norm. So again, the issue is this now, are these transformations, can they be seized to sort of make a dent on the size of informality by providing new opportunities? If so, how and what needs to be done? The green economy and the climate transitions are also providing ample opportunities as well as challenges. The FKE president very eloquently earlier highlighted this point. So renewable energy, for example, is providing a potential market of 70 billion. But there are costs also from climate change. For example, the financial cost is 7 to 15 billion. These are estimated environmental related costs that businesses and governments in Africa would bear. So there's opportunity, there's also a challenge. So the question is, how do we really minimize the challenge or mitigate the challenge, and what kind of policies and what kind of concrete actions at business level and also at the level of governments should we make, and what role employer organizations would have in mitigating the impact, but also seizing the opportunity that is being created because of the transition to renewable energy or to clean energy, and the mitigation measures, circular economy, and so on and so forth. But infrastructure deficit continues to be a major bottleneck for seizing these opportunities. Electricity outage is becoming a common phenomenon, and reducing sales up to 25%. There's an investment need of up to 130 to 170 billion to be able to fill up the existing electricity generation gap in the continent, and that's a very serious limiting factor for business expansion and businesses' ability to seize the opportunities that are being presented by this mega trends. So again, these are critical issues, and cost of electricity and increased cost, Ghana is mentioned as an example, is really putting severe restriction on the ability of businesses to expand. The policy and regulatory landscape is also changing. Labor, tax, trade, social protection policies, however, vary widely. So they're changing, but in different directions. Therefore, there's an issue of harmony, particularly within the context of the regional integration, which is one of the objectives of Business Africa is promoting regional integration, and which means engaging in the process of regional integration. But this, policies are changing nationally as a result of the mega trends. They're in certain ways they're not. There's no continental level effort or success. Let me put it that way. The effort might be there, but it's success in terms of harmonizing these laws, and the absence of framework for policy development at the continent level is a severe limitation. And this is one area where businesses need to come together and work together under the umbrella of Business Africa to kind of make their voice heard and to shape up regional policy harmonization efforts, maybe under the AU, but also the Continental Free Trade Agreement, but other regional efforts. So a coordinated private sector voice is key. I'll go through 2 slides. I don't have to finish everything else. There's a slide about the role of EBMOs, but since we will be talking about that later in the panel discussion, I will skip the final part. But just to wrap up, there's emerging opportunities from policy shifters. I've listed them here. The digital transformation is real, it's happening, it's impacting businesses, creating opportunities, but posing challenges as we speak. So growth in financial technology, for example, making it cheap and reliable access to financial digital technology, that is really creating new and dynamic opportunity for businesses. The platform economy is creating huge opportunities also for employment. Wherever you go in Africa, you see lots of people, particularly young people, sort of relying more and more on the opportunities the platform economy is providing for income as well as work. But again, there are, of course, questions about, in certain ways, about improving the distance or making these jobs distant in some ways. This urbanization and smart infrastructures, as we said, there's a huge urbanization happening in Africa. So it's creating opportunities in terms of, the need for more investment in affordable housing, green building, urban logistics. But again, for governments, in terms of the way they design these urban dwelling areas to make sure that this increased urban migration or rural urban migration is not going to create huge congestions and then undermine the ability of businesses, but also governments to provide quality services, because congestion, I think too much density will pose its own problem. But in terms of opportunities, there's smart mobility and innovative construction work to accommodate this new dynamics. Is also providing businesses in terms of talent pools when you've got a lot of people concentrated, but again, a market pool as well. When you have lots of people in a city, that's a bigger market, but it comes with a challenge. The green economy transition, renewable energy and so on, carbon markets and nature-based solutions, these are all opportunities that need seizing. So I'll wrap up here. I've mentioned this one already. There are EBMO strategies that are needed and imperative, but I don't need to go through this because they were really mentioned earlier, and we will have more opportunity to go through them later. The key thing is there's a much more stronger need today for a united voice of employers at the regional level, and EBMOs also need to embrace their social roles in many ways. And as we heard earlier, EBMOs need to model good governance, transparency themselves, so they can demand those from governments. But they need to model those. They need to be inclusive. We heard this morning from all the distinguished speakers. They need to be inclusive. Therefore, they need to be relevant to these changes that are happening. They need to be providing relevant services to their members. And they need to be really innovative in terms of, particularly the services innovation need to be the new currency, and that's a new currency. The old services are there, they are helpful in many ways, but as the business environment is changing and businesses are dealing and confronting with new challenges, EBMOs need to stand up and provide guidance, advisory guidance, new ways of doing advocacy, new services. Therefore, service and advocacy innovations need to be at the heart of EBMOs operation, and I think many EBMOs are doing that, obviously, but there's also a need for a unified regional voice under the umbrella of Business Africa. There are a number of gaps, and I think those gaps need to be overcome, and obviously we are here to reflect on those and find the path forward together through the deliberation. So my job today was to just give you some of the ideas in terms of, or to trigger enough thinking. As I said, it was not meant to be comprehensive, but I hope I did manage to give you some thought-provoking points. Thank you so much. Asante sana.
Thank you very much. Let's give another round of applause for that necessary presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now that we've seen the landscape of business in Africa, how do we then move to empower African businesses so that we'll be able to thrive? And that is what we're going to be discussing with my panel. And I saw some people trying to take pictures of the screen for the presentation. I think we can be able to give that to you. We will put the QR code to that presentation on screen. Do you have the code? If you can scan that, you will have the entire presentation. I hope your phones are good enough to be able to zoom. If your phone is part of the digital divide that we were discussing, we will try to email that to you. Okay? If you're too far, you can just walk up. Feel free. I'm giving you 45 seconds to be able to have access to this. Don't be ashamed. We love your phones and the tablets as well. As you do this, I'm just going to be calling up my panelists on stage so we can be able to get this underway. I will start off with Mr. Kulekani Mathe, who is the CEO, Business Unity South Africa. He's going to be addressing some issues for us. I will also call Ms. Jacqueline Mugo, who wears several hats for today, and the questions we are going to be addressing, I don't know if she's going to be answering in the context of all those 4 hats or just one. I'm also going to be inviting Mr. Abdou Diop, s'il vous plaît, to come and join us on stage. He's the president of Africa Committee, General Confederation of Moroccan Enterprise. And also we're going to be joined online by Mr. Dragan Radic. I hope we can be able to have a virtual presentation from him. And he's head Small and Medium Enterprises Unit at ILO. Karibuni sana to our panelists. So we can get to find out how then do we move to empower African businesses so that we can be able to thrive. So welcome. I hope the morning has been fruitful and good so far. We're going to be having a fantastic day today. So we have this is the first panel. Then in the afternoon we're going to be having another 3, if I'm not wrong. And of course my colleague Michela Mwanyiga is going to be guiding us through that. Now straight to it. I will start with our colleague from down south because I know we have discussions of the G20 coming up, but you're going to be having that discussion later on. We will invite the president to come and talk about that. But talking about issues of Africa and businesses, enabling them to thrive, how do we empower them? The question is, what needs to be done to unleash the potential? Because everybody keeps talking about Africa, the continent of potential. When I was, in past teens, we are still talking about potential. I am now, towards my sunset years, we're still talking about potential. How do we explore this potential that we keep talking about? How do we boost productivity? How do we be able to compete at the global stage? These are the digital challenges we keep talking about.
Okay, I think it's on now. Thank you very much for that question, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Good morning, everybody. The Vice President, when he addressed us earlier, he made what I think is a vitally important point about our continent, and that point is the fact that we are blessed as a continent by having a very young population, while the rest of the world, by the way, is struggling with aging populations and therefore worried about the workforce of the present as well as the workforce of the future. So this does create an opportunity for the African continent to not only train and create the skills for its own development, for its own competitiveness, and I'll come to that, but actually to create the workforce for the whole of the global economy. This is an opportunity that we have as the African continent. If we did nothing else and just focused on training the young people that we have in abundance as the African continent, of course that is going to help with boosting productivity on the African continent, in our own businesses in Africa, but it will also power the economies of the world. And in a cycle of something between 7 to 10 years, many of those young people that we send to different parts of the world will come back to the continent with more skills and be able to also contribute to the economy of the continent. So this is one of the critical important things that we can do as the African continent. To do that, of course, we need to invest in the right kinds of training. We need to invest in training in STEM subjects, which become a feedstock into these skills that we need to create for ourselves and the rest of the world. I have to say that in this day and age, boosting productivity and competitiveness of the African businesses, absolutely at the heart of it is also technology, embracing technology, investing in technology, and that has three parts to it, and this is the last point I'm making. On the one hand, it is the training that I've spoken about. On the other hand, it is about pulling our infrastructure, our financial resources together to develop the infrastructure that we need. So it's not just about looking at other parts of the globe to help create the infrastructure that is going to drive competitiveness. It's about us seeing that as an opportunity, investing it so that we become a competitive continent. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I'm going to move on to Ms. Mugwa, and maybe, as you're one of the people hosting us, I will give you at least the honor of saying hello to all our delegates. Maybe just you have 2 minutes to, say karibu to everybody, have a few opening remarks before I get now to the crux of the matter with my question that's quite weighty, if I may say so.
Thank you very much, Larry. You entered a very dangerous space. Because if you ask me to say hello to everybody, I'll greet each of them by name.
No, let's not do that. Let's just wave generally.
Because I had welcomed them at the beginning, but when I was giving my opening address, I just wanted to tell you all that looking across at this room and seeing all of you, really my heart is full of joy. You can plan a conference or an event and have nobody attending. We had a problem of having to say no to quite a number of members who are coming in at the last minute. But it's really great to see you all. I want in particular to say hello to my friends, brothers and sisters from other countries out of Africa. Please wave and say hello, just waving. Larry, I hope you're seeing them. There are very many.
There they are.
I want to greet our international guests, the speakers, ACTEM, IOE, everyone. Please wave. That includes ILO from outside Africa. There are very many. And finally, to our members, it's wonderful to see you all. Karibuni.
Okay, thank you very much. And now that you still have the microphone, maybe just dive straight into it, because I know people here, they've traveled and they're very curious about what the take-homes for this 2 days are going to be. But if we look at, from the business sense, 3 decades later, Africa, the discourse when it comes to either issues of, political issues, some of the discourse comes up with terms of creating jobs. Every single person talks about, we need to create opportunities. Africa is a country of potential, a continent of potential. But how do we move to the part of creating the jobs? And I don't know which one of the 4 hats you want to wear in answering this particular question, but what must Africa do to ensure that we not only create jobs, but we invest in Africa as Africans?
Thanks, Larry. I'll wear all those hats at the same time. I forgot to recognize my board members and my members of the Federation. I want to start by thanking ACTEMP, and in particular Sam Asfaha, who did the presentation for us. Because I think when we were thinking about this event, we said, so do we just come and talk? And we said we need some background. We need some survey, some research, some reality check about what is the state of affairs in Africa. And I think they've done an excellent job, and you've seen all that. So he's pointed to us the challenges that we are facing as a continent. And also the Deputy President, in his address, he said many wonderful things. But one of the key issues is the big challenge we have as Africa, a challenge and an opportunity. Because having children, having young people is a great blessing. But we don't have opportunities for them. And we all say that the private sector employers are the creators of jobs. So why are we not creating the jobs that Africa needs? The key point, if you look at the business environment and those challenges that Sam has pointed out, let's look at the business environment in our continent today. And even at the IOE level, we speak about that. It's a global problem, but more particularly emphasized in Africa. We are simply not making it possible for business to do business to the extent it can. The business environment is not friendly, partly through arising from external forces, but largely arising from circumstances, issues that I think we can address as a continent. So business environment, lack of policy coherence. We've been talking for many years, for those of us who've been around, in many platforms, how brilliant Africa is and how we have wonderful policies, wonderful frameworks that we've come up with in so many forums at the EU level, continental level, as employers on our own, as employers with governments, as tripartite partners, but we don't implement these policies for various reasons. So the first thing is consistently implementing the policies, doing what we say we will do, addressing the issues that would then strengthen business. We've talked about laws and regulations that we pass that more often than not really come back to bite business. I think Sam talked about expanding the tax base. We've seen the opportunity Africa has even to do business with herself better, 1.5 billion market, and the possibility of increasing our GDP by 52%. That's a huge potential, but we do not have the focused commitment to do that. So I think the first thing we need to do as business is to push government for that friendly business environment. Secondly, to have policy coherence. Thirdly, to do more with ourselves as Africa. And government allowing business to do business and getting out of business. Because in many countries, and I speak to many of my colleagues around here, you have government both formulating policy and also doing business. That makes it difficult. The third one which I'd like to highlight is the state of social dialogue in our continent today and collaboration with our counterparts. Because as businesses, and we are here largely as employers, we are not alone, we are tripartite, we have trade unions, we have government. The quality of dialogue that we have is often strained, and it's possible for us to work differently and to work better together to be able to focus on building sustainable enterprises that can create jobs. Finally, I always tell governments and trade unions that businesses do not create jobs for the sake of it. They don't just employ more people. There has to be need in that enterprise to enhance your manpower. You need these skills, you need additional people. If you don't, then you stay at the level where you are, or you reduce it to be able to contain your costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. You mentioned something with regards to policies and policy coherence. Are we doing the same thing all together? But Monsieur Diop, before we even get there, maybe just 1 or 2 minutes if you want to talk about what we are doing up north, just as introductory remarks before I ask you this question when it comes to policies.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would be very glad to thank Business Africa and also the Federation of Kenya Enterprises for this invitation, and also the great organization of this event. It's really very interesting to reconnect with all these friends of Africa here together from the north to the south and from east and west. And congratulations, Mr. President, for this big organization. So, yeah, I'm part of the Vice President of the Moroccan Confederation of Enterprises. So we are in North Africa and part of Business Africa, but also all the business organizations on the continent. There are many, so we need to really collaborate strongly across the continent. And we are really putting in place a real dialogue to help our companies to move forward, not only in Morocco, but also to grow across the continent. That's why you see since few years, a lot of Moroccan enterprises growing across Africa, because that's also part of how we push enterprises to thrive and to grow, because it's not only domestically, it's also across the continent, and we need to reinforce that between us.
And of course, Ms. Mogo mentioned something with regards to policies, and you know, if there's an issue of varying policies, if there's a disconnect, how then can we trace like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or top of the list kind of key policies that then are going to adapt to the workplace change and of course build business resilience, in your view?
In my view, the first point I wanted to raise, and which is very important, we see it in Morocco, is how the public-private dialogue and the institutional positioning of the business organization is in the country. Because for me, African businesses can only thrive when private sector is recognized as a really co-architect of policies. And we saw it in Morocco. The Confederation really gained in power when in 2011, in the new constitution, we had the opportunity to get into the parliament with 8 seats. And I think that is a very important milestone where you empower the business organization.